Bienvenidos a una historia más de nuestro México lindo y querido. Hoy me encuentro aquí enfrente de la casa de Pío Pico, Pío de Jesús Pico, el último gobernador de Alta California, cuando estas tierras pertenecían aún a nuestro México lindo y querido. Bueno, voy a platicarles un poquito de Pío de Jesús Pico. Él nació el 5 de mayo de 1801 en San Gabriel, California. Fue un influyente político y figura histórica durante la época en que California aún pertenecía a México. Como el último gobernador mexicano de Alta California, su vida y carrera política estuvieron marcadas por las tensiones entre México y Estados Unidos. En 1845, por ejemplo, fue nombrado gobernador justo antes de la guerra entre México y Estados Unidos, cuando California pasó a manos de estadounidenses, tras el Tratado de Guadalupe Hidalgo en 1848. Continuamos.
Okay, so welcome. My name is Erica. I am a park interpretive specialist here at Pio Pico State Historic Park. So welcome to our Adobe. And so, yeah, come on in. So here we have a picture of Pio Pico, who was, yes, the last Mexican governor of California before it became part of the United States. So there's a lot of history here. What we like to talk about is like, how did he and his family come to this area? So before we talk about, you know, his life and the adobe itself, I kind of like to go back to talk about like, how did people come to a location? How did they settle here? So what we'd like to talk about is in 1775, the second expedition of Juan Bautista de Anza had an expedition from making a land route from Sonora, Mexico, all the way to the Bay Area. And so Pio Pico's grandfather was a soldier during that expedition, and he had traveled with his family, being Pico's father was a child then. So they were able to be part of that expedition, and then they were able to settle in Southern California area. And at that time, it was under the Spanish rule. So Spain had this land or territory. And so that was the reason why the expedition had been done. And so when Pico and his father and grandfather were part of that expedition, they had settled in San Diego area for a bit. And then when they were in this area, they were moving from mission to mission. And his father had been in the San Gabriel area. And so that's where Pico was born, near the San Gabriel mission in 1801, May 5th, 1801. So that's where the story of Pico, started. And the interesting thing about Pico is that the family, even though his father was a soldier at the mission, they weren't very wealthy. They did, have some sort of living with the missions and growing up by the missions, but they didn't have any land or didn't have lots of money. So unfortunately, he grew up when he was poor, and so his family just went from mission to mission. And when he was born, he was here in San Gabriel area, and then his father was sent to go into the San Diego area again. So he ended up growing up in San Diego area the first years of his life. And so at the age of 19 is when his father had passed away. And so he had to learn how to take care of his family. So, that was the first years of his life where he had began living in Southern California. But yeah, and I'll talk more about his life and his, the adobe. In each room will have like different stories to tell. Yeah. Do we come on in to the next room? So this is the adobe room. We like to show the adobe room because of the exposed adobe bricks. And yeah, and this is one of the original doors of the adobe. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes, and we like to talk about the adobe. Like people always ask, like, well, how is it made? We have to let people know. Well, what do you think if you look at the adobe? What are the little things that you see? What do you think is a mixture or ingredients of the adobe? So we tell usually students or visitors, like, okay, adobe, we use these molds. So these will be the molds right behind you here. So these would be the molds that would be used for the adobe. So you could see the size. Yes, to make the adobe. So if you look at the walls. Oh, okay. Yeah, so the molds, so you get the mixture of the dirt and rocks and twigs to make it really strong. And then when you mix it up, and then to make it stick, we use cow manure. So that would be packed into the molds. And so it would be laid out to dry. And we always say like, oh, well, when's the best time to let the adobe bricks dry? Only one season where it's hot enough, summer. So that's why it took about 5 years to finish the adobe house. And it was 1849 through 1854 to finish the adobe. And we also, would tell visitors that it took so long because it was originally 21 room.
Esta es la residencia de Pio Pico, construida en el año de 1853, más o menos de esa época, 1853. Pio Pico, el último gobernador mexicano de Alta California, adquirió el rancho, que se le conoce como el ranchito. Lo adquirió, lo pasó de Bartolo, Bartolo, en 1848, y se construyó su casa aquí en 1853, 1848 lo adquirió, y en 1853 se construyó la casa que está a mis espaldas, a la cual vamos a conocer más adelante. Esta residencia, conocida como el ranchito, combinaba elementos de diseño californiano, de tradición con influencias estadounidenses. Vamos a pasar a conocer, pues.
21 room adobe. So yeah, it was a very large adobe house, yeah, at that time. Yeah, so we like to point out the originals and then the adobe bricks. But we also like to tell people like the floors were not wood at that time. It was just dirt. And so in order to kind of, like the fireplace was not original. It was put in the late 30s to 1940s. But we tell a story of how the house was kept warm or cool. But why? The adobe, it's great. It keeps cool in the summer and then warm when we have the heat inside. So it's good ventilation. That if you would like to, come on, follow me. And we'll head into the other room over here, which would be the Pico's bedroom. So yes. And the reason why he chose the bedroom here, so at that time, he had married Maria Ignacio Alvarado Pico. Unfortunately, she had passed before the house was completed. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's a portrait of Maria, his wife, and then a copy of Pico, a portrait of Pico. But this would have been his bedroom. And the reason why he chose this room, he was a single man by the time his wife had passed. It was just him, so that's why it's a smaller room. But he chose this one because it was facing the front of the house, which the original river, San Gabriel River, was about a mile-ish to the property. But he chose this location because it was so close. And then he also had a view of the property there, the river. He was also next to this room. Next to him would have been the ranch manager's office. So he could be close to everything, like the front of the house and then also to the manager's office. But we do have an original piece as well. So this would be original desk of Pio Pico. And so, yeah, this room it shows a few items. So like an example, the globes would have been something also on the desk, but also if you look at it closely, it is a security measure. So if you are able to look at it, you can see who would come in behind you. So decorative, but also, it's a little secretive there. We're like, okay, I can see, yeah. And then the other items would have been Maria's. So the gloves, her fan, the Bibles, which were also in Spanish because they only spoke Spanish. Yeah. Yes, at that time. And so the crucifix, and then Hortensia Gaddy was also a friend and neighbor who helped take care of Pio Pico in his later years in life, and was also a wife of one of the cowboys or ranchers that were here at the adobe. So, and then this also shows a picture of how it looked. Same hallway. And then if you look closely, it also has the on the wallpaper. Mm-hmm. So this is a replica, but also we can see how it used to look. So yeah, so in this the old ranch manager's room or office is now a room where we display artifacts and objects or everyday items, what was used in the field, the corn planter, where it would be dropped in here, and then the person would be pushing it, and then they would come through here, and then, so, your picture here. Okay, yeah. Yeah, so this is more talking about like the everyday life, who would work here, you know, everyday household items, the rug beater, pictures of that, the irons, the blacksmith tongs. We have the branding iron here. So just to show people like everyday uses, you know, that they may not know. Yep. And then we have a showcase here of the different items that were excavated. Mm-hmm. So we have the Native American arrows, the rocks that were used as weights, putting in the nets to catch fish in the river. Of course, you know, the bottles. We even have a doll dress that was made out of leather, and leather being very expensive at the time. And because he had his ranch, he was able to have that type of material. But the spurs,
para continuar hablando aquí de la historia de la casa de Pio Pico en la ciudad de Guiri, California, voy a hablarles un poco de las inundaciones y de la reconstrucción. Aquí a mi izquierda, a mi lado izquierdo, está el río, pasa el río San Gabriel. Pasaba, ¿verdad? Pues ya ahorita está entubada ahí el canal, cemento. En el año de 1867, 1882, la casa original, la que vemos allá hacia el fondo, sufrió daños significativos debido a las inundaciones de 1867 que alteraron el curso del río San Gabriel. Posteriormente, en 1882, otra inundación casi destruyó la estructura. Pio Pico la reconstruyó incorporando elementos de estilo estadounidense en el diseño tradicional de California.
Dress that was made out of leather, and leather being very expensive at the time, and because he had his ranch, he was able to have that type of material. But the spurs, just everyday items that were found here in the excavation. Yeah. And then we'll go through the main hallway, which was the original entrance to the adobe. So people would come into here and be greeted, and then, of course, being entered into the sala or the living room for entertainment. But he chose this because, again, this was the main entrance to facing the river, which is why he chose the property. We love this area. So, yeah. Erica. Yes. Yeah, so this is the sala or the living room. And so, of course, Pio Pico wanted to show his wealth. He loved to gamble. He loved to have, showing off his money. And so he wanted to make a grand, way of showing that with having the high ceilings, having his furniture, having his wallpaper, and at that time it did show wealth. And so it was important. So by the time it would get here, it was kind of like, a little bit older fashioned, but at the same time, a man who had lots of money, he wanted to show that. So that's a few ways that he did that. But the sala or the living room was a place to entertain his guest. And, of course, at that time, traveling took a long time. So when people would come and visit, they would stay for extended periods of time. So they had entertainment, so music, being able to play games. We have a chess over here. And then, yeah. So different ways of entertainment, reading, of course, or being able to just converse. And so another thing that we like to talk about is our chair here, which we nicknamed the cowboy chair. And if you notice, it's done very differently. The legs of the chair, it's in the middle. So yeah, why is it like that? So the reason is that when cowboys would sit down, that they would have the spurs would not damage the bottom of the chair. And then the holsters, would be able to go in between here. So if you'd like to, you can sit in there, but also you would see if you were to sit down, it would be room for all of that. It would not damage the chairs that way. So that's nicknamed the cowboy chair. Yeah. And so here is the branding, the sign for it, yes, which would be here. So we tell people, like, of course. Okay, yeah. So that's what we tell people who would visit, like, that was yep. And then we would brand it just way, put it into the fire and then brand it. So. But we tell a lot of people that that's just one of the ways that he became wealthy. He started off of course, in San Diego and got a business there, would sell items. And then after a few years, he was able to come here to this location, and then he started building his adobe. He became part of a political and started doing politics. And so he gained land and became, friends with other politicians. And then also business, he became smart in knowing that, by the time the gold rush, in the mid 1800s, he wanted to sell cattle, or he wanted to sell the meat or anything he could to those who were coming to California for the gold rush. So he knew that was something he could profit off of. So during, the height of his wealth, he had land, he had money, but he was a gambler. So he did like to spend his money. And a story that we like to tell is that he bet on horse racing. And on one of the horse race bets was $25,000 at that time. And today's money would be up to $1 million. And he lost the bet, but he didn't care because he was so wealthy that he just, it was just, something that he did. Yeah. So that tells a little bit of the story of, like, he was very wealthy and that he would spend the money and then, yeah. But that was, a fun story we like to tell. Is a very wealthy man into politics and business, but also liked to spend the money that he had. Yeah. Oh, and there's a picture, yes, of Pio Pico. In the later years of his life. And so this would be a replica of the coat that he would wear. And so it's a replica because usually when people would be buried in their best, so we believe that he would have been buried in his actual coat.
Continuando con la historia de Pio Pico, su legado histórico, Pio Pico es recordado por su lucha para preservar la soberanía mexicana en California, pero también por su papel en la economía y en la sociedad de la región. Después de su mandato como gobernador, adquirió vastas tierras, incluyendo el Rancho Paso de Bartolo, que es aquí donde está esta casa, ¿verdad? En lo que hoy es Whittier, California. Aquí me encuentro en la ciudad de Whittier, California. Aquí construyó la Casa Pío Pico en 1853, esta que estamos viendo aquí, que luego vamos a pasar para que la vean hacia adentro, ¿verdad? ¿Qué es lo que hay por ahí? Una lujosa residencia que se construyó, más bien que se convirtió en un símbolo de su estatus y su contribución a la historia del estado de California. Aunque perdió gran parte de su fortuna en la década de 1890, su legado sigue vivo a través de la Casa de Pío Pico, que es hoy un parque histórico estatal. ¿Vamos a conocerlo? Claro.
It's a replica because usually when people would be buried in their best, so we believe that he would have been buried in his actual coat. So that's why that's just a replica. But the other items are original. So we have the snuff box, the horse whip, his cane, and his umbrella. So those were donated by family members. And so, yeah. And then, yes, the beautiful Bibles. We like to tell again, like Spanish, because he grew up, learning Spanish, reading and writing in Spanish. And he thought he didn't have to learn English because it was, under Spanish government. Yeah, under the Spanish. He was born a Spaniard, and then when Mexico had their independence from Spain, you still spoke Spanish. Yeah. And so, yeah. And then unfortunately, when the the Mexican-American War, yes, then that's when things changed. Yeah. So he thought, well, I didn't have to learn English, but he thought, well, family members, friends do, so he trusted them. But that was also a downfall of how he started losing his property. So I'd like to point out the map here. So this shows all of the land or acres. So there's 4 different areas here in Southern California, and this one shows the modern areas. So this would have been like San Fernando area. This is our area here. At the original time, it was 8,894,000 acres, but all 4 areas total was over 500,000 acres. But this one alone is just here. And then the Anaheim area, and then the San Diego County area. So we like to tell the story of how did he lose his land. The first one being the San Fernando area. Him and his brother Andres owned that together. They decided to sell the land so they can build the Pico House in downtown LA, which is near Olvera Street. And then over here, we have a picture of the Pico House, which was a,
Pico House.
Yes, yes, it was the whole, yes, it is. And that was a 3-story hotel, which he had built and had indoor plumbing, which was something very luxurious. So people from different countries, important people would stay there. So that was one of the important places that he did build in downtown Los Angeles. So that was part of the first property, how he was able to build that. Then the second property was the San Diego area. And so his son-in-law, he asked if he could have some of the property that he wanted to have. And so again, because Pico didn't know English, he only spoke Spanish. His son-in-law, Jose Moreno, he asked him if he could sign it, the portion of it, but he did it in English for him. He asked him if it can go ahead and, borrow some of the land. And he's like, yeah, okay, I'll sign what you have for me. And then he signed it off, thought he was only giving him a portion of the land. And then he found out that he actually signed off the entire property of San Diego. And so unfortunately he lost that, and he thought, I'm going to go ahead and try to sue him. But at that time you could not sue family members. So he lost the entire San Diego property that he owned. And so, yeah, so his son-in-law swindled him out of that. So a brother-in-law swindled him out of the San Diego County area. Then we have the Anaheim area, which he owned with another rancher. It was a bad year for everyone. They could not afford the property anymore, so they let go of that one. So last property is the one that we're standing on here. It was, the land went all the way from like Rose Hills area all the way to like Santa Fe Springs, Norwalk area. So it was a large land area, but it was the smallest, so that's why he called it El Ranchito. El Ranchito, yes, it was the smallest one. But again, because he didn't know Spanish, he thought, okay, I want to go ahead and have a translator and go in to get a loan so I can do renovation to the property. And so he did that. And he signed the paperwork thinking he was just getting a loan to get the money. He went back to go make a payment, and he found out that the translator helped swindle the land for the person that gave him the loan, which is Bernard Cohen. And so he thought, okay, I can go ahead and sue him.
La casa de Pio Pico. Uno de los datos interesantes y tristes, pues, es la pérdida de la propiedad en el año de 1800, la pérdida de esta propiedad, 1892. En 1892, Pio Pico perdió su propiedad debido a una disputa legal con Bernard Cohen, un abogado estadounidense. Pico, que no sabía leer ni escribir en inglés, había firmado independientemente la escritura, o indebidamente más bien la escritura de la propiedad, ¿verdad? Y bueno, pues al aceptar lo que creía que era el préstamo, pues un préstamo que estaba solicitando en 1883. Los tribunales fallaron a favor de Cohn y Pico fue desalojado de este lugar. Falleció en la pobreza 2 años después, en el año de 1894. Imagínense, era una figura importante dentro de la política a nivel nacional de México. Y lo que le pasó, imagínense ustedes lo que les pasó a miles, a millones de mexicanos humildes que perdieron, que estas tierras pasaron a Estados Unidos de la misma manera, por no saber inglés, por no saber firmar los documentos en el cambio de español al inglés aquí. Mucha gente perdió sus ranchitos, muchas personas perdieron sus casitas. Esto le pasó a Pio Pico, quien fuera gobernador de California. Imagínense qué no le pasó a otras gentes. Triste la historia, ¿verdad?
Bernard Cohen. And so he thought, okay, I can go ahead and sue him for getting my property back. But it took 10 years for him to try to fight this battle. And because it took so long, he ended up losing all of his money and could not afford to try to get his property back. So he unfortunately did lose this land. And
also because he didn't understand English.
Exactly. Yes, to sign it. Mm-hmm. Yes. Yes, and even the interpreter, helped swindle him out of that. So he was unfortunate, and
a lot of people, thousands, millions of people that time.
Yes.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Change the Spanish.
Yes. Yes, and the change with government and exactly. Yeah, so that was the story of how he was, became, was able to be in business and politics and became wealthy. Well, one of the wealthiest persons in the area. And so because of the change of the language and with all the paperwork and people trying to take land and ownership of things, yes, he did lose it because of not knowing the language, unfortunately. Yeah, but another, another area that exposed adobe bricks. Mm-hmm.
All right.
Yeah. So in the next room, we like to talk again about like the way it looked during his time when he was. Yes. So this is the housekeeper's room, how it would look, and again we have the whole layout. But we see the differences of the bricks, the modern one versus the adobe, so that way we have it exposed. But again, this was built in the chimneys were built in the late 1930s to early 1940s. But there's a metal bucket there that's how we tell people that's how it was warmed. The holes were warmed up, put into a metal bucket, and put into different rooms, and that's how the rooms were heated. And so there was no electricity, so that's how it was able to stay warm. Also, the light, the windows were specifically built that way, so that way there could be more light or into the rooms. Mm-hmm. And then we also like to tell people, well, there was no electricity, no heat, no running water, no bathrooms. Like, where did they go? Of course, there was outhouses in the back, but in the middle of the night, you wouldn't want to do that. So we tell, like, if you look closely, there's a chamber pot. So what is a chamber pot used for? So during the middle of the night, that's where that would be. Yes. Yeah. So that's where you would go. And so, of course, the housemaids or younger kids would be, yes, that would be their job to empty it out afterwards. But yes, it's just daily life. How is it different? It's definitely changed. Yeah, life in the 1800s. So we'll continue, go through here in the excavation room. So again, like we had showed earlier, we had different items that were excavated, and so this, being one of the rooms. So there was the items that were found here. But also, we had learned that. Not only was it a place to find, items, but because there was no refrigeration, and so being in an adobe, it keeps cool. And so, and in the ground, especially, is where things would be stored. So it was like also a storage area for, food and different items. And so we have this exposed because it showed like the original size of the room. So the dining room was actually both of these rooms, but during the renovation, he made it a little smaller for that. But yep. And then we'll come into the dining room. And so the dining table is an original as well. So this is another piece that's original. And it could actually have go up to 8 or 12 feet. We have 3 more sleeves that could be, but he liked to entertain. He liked to have visitors. So it's just an example of, again, daily life. How would it look like? We'll just to get a better view of how things were displayed and everyday life of 1800s. And again, the wallpaper we have. Yep, example there. And then we...
Como reconocimiento, más bien, como esta casa de Pio Pico es algo como un reconocimiento como monumento histórico. En 1907 y 1917, en 1907, ciudadanos locales de aquí de la ciudad de Juárez, liderados por Harry and William Russell Strong, lograron que el sitio fuera reconocido como un monumento histórico. Strong, quien fuera amigo o conocía a Pico desde 1867, a Pio Pico, adquirió la propiedad. Recuerden que pues Pio Pico perdió esta propiedad, se la quitaron. Entonces él recuperó la propiedad y la restauró en 1909. Esta casa que está a mis espaldas, la casa de Pio Pico. En 1907 la propiedad fue transferida al estado de California y designada como uno de los primeros parques históricos estatales en 1927. La casa de Pio Pico, último gobernador de California.
Not only was it a place to find, items, but because there was no refrigeration. And so being in an adobe, it keeps cool. And so, and in the ground especially is where things would be stored. So it was like also a storage area for, food and different items. And so we have this exposed because it showed like the original size of the room. So the dining room was actually both of these rooms, but during the renovation, he made it a little smaller for that. But yep. And then we'll come into the dining room. And so the dining table is an original as well. So this is another piece that's original. And it could actually have go up to 8 or 12 feet. We have 3 more sleeves that could be, but he liked to entertain. He liked to have visitors. So it's just an example of, again, daily life. How would it look like? We'll just to get a better view of how things were displayed and everyday life of 1800s. And again, the wallpaper we have. Yep, example there. And then we do have the picture of the original, so that's how we know what it would have looked like. This is the replica. Yeah, so then, so this was chosen here because we have a door here that leads out to the outside. And so if you go around the corner behind this wall here, and you can kind of see it through the window, we have the original or the outside oven. Yeah. So that's why this is the dining room, the kitchen, outside, the oven. So yeah, it's basically placed for that. And then we'll come back to here. And so this room again tells more about the story of Pio Pico. We have, pictures of how him, his wife, and then his wife's nieces, which they had adopted, so he had adopted children. And then a picture of Andres, his brother, there, who was also a soldier, but again, that's how they... Yeah, So it tells a little bit more about his family. And then on this area, we have quotes of, either different points of view. So if you're a friend of him, you would think that he would be, he would be generous friend and being able to host you here or to help you, either with money or land. Or you have other people who had worked for him or, are not friends. And so different points of views, depending on perspective, right? So yeah, but we want to share like different points of views for, throughout history, of course. So after Pico had lost his land, he spent the last 2 years of his life traveling from house to house, friend's house or family's house. And unfortunately, he ended up dying penniless at his daughter's house. And he died September 11th in 1894 at the age of 93, which is still a pretty long life, especially in the 1800s. But after he left his house, he was evicted, the house went into ruins. And so a family and friend of Harriet Strong, she decided that this adobe should be saved. So she ended up buying the property, was able to fix it up with the city of Whittier, the women's club. And after a few years, she couldn't do it anymore. And so she sold the property to the city of Whittier. And then the city of Whittier does own the land itself, but the state of California does have ownership of the adobe. So it became one of the first state parks. So in 1927 and on, it was able to be part of the state of California. And so we've been having renovations that shows, the before and after renovations throughout the 1900s, late 1900s and early 2000s. But yeah, just very interesting life of, yeah. Yeah. Of course. Yeah. We always welcome everyone to come in and join us anytime. And thank you for being here today.
De manera de conclusión, sobre la historia de Pío Pico y de la casa de Pío Pico en este caso, Pío Pico falleció el 11 de septiembre de 1894, dejando un legado que va más allá de sus logros políticos. Fue testigo y partícipe del cambio de soberanía de California, y su vida simboliza la transición de una región fronteriza mexicana a un estado clave dentro de los Estados Unidos. La Casa Pío Pico, esta casa que se encuentra, pues aquí estamos en la ciudad de Whittier, California, sigue siendo un recordatorio tangible de su influencia y su época, manteniendo viva la memoria del último gobernador mexicano de California. Gracias por acompañarnos en México Vivo, o ayer, hoy y más allá. Gracias, hasta la próxima.